The warmth of the fire radiated around the four of us, flames crackling, sparks falling to the grass, but never catching fire. 8 eyes of all different colors glowed brightly in the light, all concentrated on the source. The wind threatened the flames every so often, but the cold breeze never won over. In silence, we sat in a circle upon the darkened grass, enjoying the fire, the nature around us. It wasn't until I spoke that the eyes trained on the fire looked up, though they still glowed. I always see things in the flames, I said. My friends raised their eyebrows. Alice, the first one to speak after a few seconds, asked, "What do you mean, Celeste?" Her slightly cocked head to one side. I looked at her for a second, her light brown eyes curious, before my gaze was redirected to the fire. I stared longingly at it, my eyes looking almost as if I was hypnotized. My deep blue blended with the reflection of the bright orange, creating a sparkling, devious shade of my original eye color. I mean, I see images in the fire, and sometimes the images are moving, like people fighting, people dancing, animals racing, trees swaying, anything, really. I shrugged, letting out a breath. My friends were very accepting and never judged. That's what I liked about them. They never underestimated anyone and never stereotyped, so I wasn't afraid to voice this aloud, knowing they would understand and find it quite cool nonetheless. I looked up to see a light smile on Conrad's face, the only boy in our group of friends. He was sitting to my right. "I can understand that," he said. His own deep emerald eyes were focused on the licking flames, wide and never blinking. I smiled too, looking back at the fire as well. I breathed in the smoky scent, knowing by the time we left here tonight we would all smell a little bit like burnt wood. "It's like I can see things other people can't," I tried to explain. Conrad nodded, though he still glared at the fire. A moment later, I heard the boy's deeper voice respond, almost in a hushed whisper. We were only just able to hear him over the crackling of the fire. His mysterious tone reached our ears softly. Not the only one. Just as Conrad spoke, the wind picked up around us, combing through our hair, weaving in between the blades of grass. The trees shook around us slightly, brushing their leaves against one another carefully, creating a sound reminiscent of a mother hushing her child. We were in the forest, off to the side of the city, where all of the urbanization turns into nature and woods. We were about 20 minutes out into the land. And if I looked off to my right, in the far, far distance, I could see the outlines of tall buildings and flashing lights and airplanes zooming overhead. My little group of friends included Conrad, Alice, and Pat, who is more commonly known as Obsidian. We sat there for a while longer, the cool breeze brushing past our fair skin, light conversation passed between our lips. And when my gaze wasn't fixed upon the fire, my eyes glanced from person to person as they spoke. As Alice spoke, I watched her expression change with each sentence. Alice had dark brown hair. It was very curly with tiny ringlets around her entire head, though most of the time she straightened it, like tonight. And it was chilly out, so Obsidian covered her torso in like a dark blue jacket, the zipper halfway zipped up. Her dark brown hair fell just past her shoulders, her brown eyes matching. Conrad, being the only boy in the group, of course had a different style than us girls. He often wore tighter shirts, much like tonight, showing off his skinny figure. His eyes were the color of a piercing emerald. the image echoing in your mind whenever you cast your gaze upon them. It's easy to get lost in those pools of emerald, almost as if you're a field team in a field teeming with evergreen grass, flowing gently side to side, the sun casting its golden light upon the blades. His hair was blonde and flipped to one side. It was the fad these days. Boys his age seemed to like to grow their hair and style it so it looked flippy. That's what they call it. I loved the look. Conrad was an overall attractive guy and the most caring person I've ever met. Alice and I almost matched tonight. We both wore crazy pants. However, mine were black and white and a black top clinging to my skin. People say my eyes were the deepest shade of blue they'd ever seen. I turned to my left to view the moon. The crackling of the fire was still audible in my ears, but now, instead of focusing on the fire, I focused on the moon's light. I liked to pick out the visible craters along the surface. They showed just how old the moon actually was, like the wrinkles and sunspots of an old man or dents in a race car. No matter whether the moon was spotlessly young or terribly old, I'd still love to look at it. Everything looks so much better under the moonlight. I don't understand how a gigantic, colorless rock in the sky could be so inspiring to me, but it is. Just the fact that all of life and its struggles occur underneath its very presence seemed to spark a new light in me. I soon found myself lost in a blissful daze as my friends continued their conversation without me. After several minutes, I heard my name. "Hey Celeste, what you looking at?" Coming to my senses, I blinked once, though I never took my gaze off that glowing beauty in the sky. Taking in a breath to reply, I felt no need to lie about my doings. "Oh, I'm just staring at the..." Suddenly I stopped mid-sentence, my words catching in my throat. "Celeste," Alice said. Squinting my eyes, I averted my gaze from the moon to the landscape beneath it. I leaned in the direction of my eyes a little, using my left arm for support. And then I lost my place. Okay, here we go. The sound of the fire seemed distant as I focused on the horizon. Upon it, where the trees just parted, I could swear I saw 4 human silhouettes. For the first 2 seconds, I couldn't make out anything but that. But as they got closer, I was able to tell by the length of their hair and the shadows of their clothing, it seemed like there were 2 boys and 2 girls. The light of the moon fell behind them, making their stride seem unreal. Like something you'd see at the beginning of a scary movie. It almost seemed like they were walking in slow motion, setting a magical mood upon the scene. However, what made me the most perplexed was one thing in particular. Like I said, I couldn't see anything but the outline of their bodies, and I couldn't see the details of their faces. But if you looked hard enough, it seemed as if there were 2 glowing orbs where their eyes should be. "Celeste, what is it?" Alice prodded again. I took a breath, catching my voice. I said, "Look up there." I nodded towards the horizon. It took a second, but after a moment, Obsidian spoke. "Are those people?" "No clue," I answered. "Wow. It looks like they have red eyes," said Conrad. His voice lowered a bit as if they could hear us. However, they were still a bit away. "This is really odd," Obsidian said, and finally I pulled my glance away and I nodded at her. "Wait," she murmured under her breath, squinting, much like I did earlier. "Are those knives in their hands?" None of us said anything for a moment, just glanced towards the oncoming figures. Finally, after a moment, Conrad's voice filled the eerie silence. "Guys, let's put out the fire. We've got to get the hell out of here." After a few minutes of kicking the fire because we didn't have any water, it was down to a fair sizzle. "Whatever," I spoke with urgency. "Let's just go." Taking one glance at the threatening bodies, we hightailed it out of there. Starting off with a run instead of a fast walk, we all walked next to each other, side by side. As I said earlier, we were about 20 minutes away from town, so we had a while to go before we were out of the forest and back to civilization. I glanced over at my friends, whose eyes were trained forward as if the city was on their minds too. After a few moments, I took a sidelong glance at Conrad, who was next to me. "Where are they?" I huffed through my hard breathing, watching as he slightly turned around to check. His eyes widened and he said, "They're right behind us." And without saying anything else, he tried to pick up his speed. This caused me even more panic, although it did kick in some adrenaline. Now we all seemed to just lean forward into the run, arms swinging by our sides. We were almost cut out to be Olympic runners that day. "How close are they?" I heard Obsidian shout over loud breathing. "Just a couple of yards," Conrad replied, though his eyes never left his destination. The trees were getting really thick, and I was losing sight of the moon. Not only was I losing my vision, but I also felt my shoelaces whipping around, sometimes slicing against my bare ankle. My shoe was becoming looser by the second, and there was nothing I could do about it. All I could think was run, run, run. I had no plans on staying around for a nice chat with these guys. My mind focused on escaping as I sped onward. I was breathing rather hard at this point. Sharp breaths, in and out. Saliva was building up thick in my throat. I don't know why, it's just something my body does when I run too much. I swallowed hard, my lungs as heavy as my aching feet. I tried to dodge almost invisible things in the dark. No need to run into a defenseless tree. I wasn't planning on earning a concussion tonight. Through my deep breathing, I managed to shout over the sound of the wind racing past my ear, "Conrad, Conrad, are they still there?" The only thing I heard in response was my own breathing and the sound of my footsteps crunch against withered leaves and dead twigs. And startled, I chanced hitting an oncoming tree as I took a sidelong glance to my left. No one was there. The forest had really, really closed in. The trees were shoulder tight. It reminded me of going to a rock concert and standing in the pit. My friends and I, we'd been running side by side, shoulder to shoulder. I was on the far right. I could see my friends if I looked to the left, but they were all gone. Nothing but trees whizzing past me. "Oh my God," I murmured. "Get away, faster, don't stop running, must escape, be careful, don't let him get you, pick up the pace, stupid shoes." And hear them, evil, oh my God, will they kill me? Again, I decided to take a second look behind me, hoping not to run into a tree. Quickly, I glanced backwards, straining the muscles in my neck and back as I craned around to peek at my threat. A scream like an alarm scrounded from my throat. My threat was merely several feet behind me and gaining speed quickly. There was only one of the four we saw earlier behind me. I could see the red feminine in her eyes, like a swirling pot of witch's brew. The back of my shoes rubbed against my heel. With each pounding step, I began to wince. I was pretty sure the skin was being rubbed raw. After several strides, I decided these shoes were only weighing me down. With a few rough kicks, I managed to flip them off my sore feet, leaving them behind in the dust. My feet were moving so fast, I barely couldn't control them anymore. They weaved through obstacles in a pattern I couldn't comprehend. After a second, I glanced down at my feet, not even getting a still image of my white socks. All I saw in the darkness was a white blur. I realized I basically had no control from the waist down. Looking back, I gasped. And when I felt my right foot come in contact with a root sticking up from the ground, I came face to face with the grass in under a second. The ground rushed towards my face. A blur of the dark grass smacked me dead between the eyes. With my speed while running, the momentum kept me going forward, and I just somersaulted, catching air slightly as my body moved forward uncontrollably. I couldn't see anything at all, just the hue of green. However, I felt the twist of my back, and I felt the fling of my wrists, as well as the stretch of my neck. In a few simple pops, I heard and felt my neck crack, much like the cracking of knuckles. And I landed, so I was facing the way I was coming from. And as my eyes focused, I knew this was going to be the terrible, painful end. Through my vision, I saw the horrifying sight of that girl sprinting towards me, red eyes, grasping my soul and ripping it apart. Her knife seemed to stand out against everything. I felt my heart squeeze tight inside my chest, knowing this was probably going to be the last time I felt it beating. In one single flash, I saw my life fly by me before a scream that even scared myself erupted from my throat. What an ugly noise to hear from yourself right before you die. Your own horror expressing itself in a scream. I brought my arms up in front of me, blocking my body. I knew it wasn't going to do much, but it was something. And with a few more blinks, I braced myself for imminent death, ready for the pain heading my way. But it never came. Instead of the slicing of my skin and decapitation, something even more traumatizing occurred. Just as this silent, swift girl caught up to me, a cold, sweeping breeze of pure darkness encircled me. I gasped as my vision went dark and I lost sight of everything. Within less than a second, the world disappeared. And I wondered if this was death.